Greetings, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. I am your host, Maggie Cavanaugh, Keys to Your Best Life, and I am here today with Sharon Wilharm. And Sharon is an amazing woman. She's full of gifts and talents and creativity, and God has allowed her to use those to bless the audiences in the area of entertainment, public speaking, you name it, she does it. Sharon, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Maggie. I am glad to be here.
I am so honored to have you today because I just love the things that you do to encourage and inspire, really the masses, but women specifically. Being a woman and getting nurture from some of the things that you have done in the past is such a blessing. I know for a fact that this new podcast project that you've been on has really been impacting so many people. So I listened to the most recent one and I was like, man, this is so good. And it looks like it's gone international.
It really has 56 countries it goes to. And three of my top cities are in India and Nigeria, which is that not crazy or what? I have a bigger following in India than I do in my hometown.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I have found in the years of ministry that it's those things that shock us like that, where, who knew that, that's where it needs to be heard so desperately.
Yeah. One of the towns that was one of my top towns, it is 1% Christian. And I'm like, that is so wild that in this town where there's no Christians, somehow or another, they discovered this podcast, and there are women listening to it, and I'm just like, that is just the most amazing thing to me.
It is incredibly the most amazing thing, and it is only God that can do that.
Yeah. There is no other explanation.
Absolutely. It just, when you think about it and you think about the percentage, but that's good. I believe that the podcast itself and those women hearing it will turn around and share it with someone else and so forth. And the word will go forth in that community, and that 1% will increase as a result of your obedience.
That would just be incredible. It's so funny because when I was younger, my mom was always like, I was in all the different missions organizations, growing up, Mission Friends and GAs and ACT Teens. And I remember wondering if I was ever going to be a missionary and thinking, God, I don't want to go to Africa. I'll serve you, but please don't, I like air conditioning and running water and, all those conveniences. But there was a time when I was in college that I actually applied to be a short-term foreign missionary because it was like, okay, God, I'm willing. And then he said, you know what? I really don't need you there. So he closed that door. But it's so cool now because I'm looking going, that is so neat. Because I'm never going to go to Africa. I don't think I'm going to Africa or India. But it's like God is still sending me there, And so I just love how he does that. How as a little girl, when I would study about these foreign countries, never, ever imagining that I would be speaking to women there.
That is amazing. And it's true. Media is powerful. And you're no stranger to media. You've been doing all facets of media for years. Matter of fact, I think I met you at Christian Women in Media years ago whenever you were working on a film. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. But I'm so excited about this podcast. What inspired you to get this going, focusing on the area of women in the Bible?
Well, I have always had a fascination with women of the Bible, and it's just my personal thing. And January of 2019, I took over as women's ministry director at our church, which is really funny because prior to this, I didn't do things with women. When I started going to Christian Women in Media, it was the first time I had gone to a women's type thing. I was in the film world and I did writer's world, but as far as women, no. But I loved Christian Women in Media. And then when it came up with women's ministry at our church, I was like, okay, God, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll do this. And so I'm like, okay, when you're a women's ministry director, you're supposed to do a Bible study. And so I was like, I'll do a monthly Bible study and luncheon at my house where I would invite the women over. And I'm like, I love Bible women. So I started off with Proverbs 31. And then each month we would focus in on a different woman. And what I was doing is I was doing Proverbs 31 and the different aspects and finding women in the Bible that like reflected those different, characters of the Proverbs woman. And so I was doing that, and then we had COVID hit. And, I'm like, okay, obviously I can't do, our church has closed down everything. And I had never, I didn't listen to podcasts. I was guest on podcasts when I was a filmmaker, but I am so non-techie, which is really funny for a filmmaker, but I am not the techie one. I am the creative one. And so I didn't know anything about podcasts, but when I found out that there was such a thing as solo storytelling podcast, I'm like, I could do this. This would be fun to tell these Bible women stories. And so I started it in the midst of the lockdown and have been going strong ever since.
Wow. I do believe what the enemy means for harm, God always turns around for good, because probably had COVID not hit, you probably wouldn't have had time to be still, to get that download and launch this amazing thing that's reaching into rural areas in other countries.
I probably wouldn't. I really wouldn't have given it that much thought, but it's just, it has been a lifeline for me, when there was nothing to do, everybody else is going, I don't know what to do. And I was wanting to speak. That's what I thought 2020 was going to be, with me traveling and speaking. And yeah, that didn't happen. And so I would have been just going, God, what do you want me to do? We finished movies and I can't do anything with the women's ministry. So I wouldn't have had anything without this podcast. And it just brings me so much joy to study and to be able to share with women what God is revealing, as I just delve into it. I just love it.
It has been incredible for sure. Now, for the women that are watching, it is on several platforms. I know it's on iTunes and so forth. And we've got her bio listed in this broadcast. So I want you to go and follow her. And also, she's on all the social media platforms. I think I even seen you on Pinterest.
I am. Now, I've got to admit, I don't get Instagram. I'm on it, and I keep periodically trying it. And then I'm just like, I don't understand. And I really don't care about Instagram. But I do like Pinterest. I get Pinterest, and Twitter, and I love Facebook. Facebook is the most logical to me. It meets my needs the most, but yeah. So if you're going to Instagram, don't expect a whole lot of activity.
It's funny to keep up with all the different social media stuff. It's a full-time job. It really is. So
it is.
But you guys can find her at the website, and that can direct you to the podcast. And I encourage you to subscribe to it, because if you are a woman, you not only need to know more about biblical the lives of women in biblical times, but you can apply it to yourself. And I love the fact that you were correlating in the Bible study the characteristics of the Proverbs 31 woman. We all aspire to be her.
Yes. And so that was really fun for me, and that's kind of what got me looking at all these different women. And it was funny because originally when I started the podcast, I was just focusing on the main women. I have all these women in the Bible books. And so I was going with the ones that I had the most information on. And then I was talking with Andrew Rappaport, who does Christian Podcast Community, which is like a podcast network, about having my podcast on it. And he said, my only concern is what happens when you run out of Bible women. And I was like, I haven't really thought through that. And I'm thinking, I'm working my way through the Bible, and I was only going through the main ones. I'm like, at this rate, I'm going to run out in a year, So then I started delving into the more obscure ones, and that is where I just love it. These women that are mentioned in just one verse, and some of them are named and some of them are unnamed. And it's like, why did God bother to include them? There is a reason why this woman is here. He wanted us to know something from her story. And so those are the ones that are actually, my most popular episode is Mephibosheth's nurse. And, one verse, but I love her story.
Can you share a little bit of her story? Because I think I missed that one.
Yeah, it is the coolest story. So Mephibosheth was a son of Jonathan. And at some point, when there was chaos with the whole, how with the kings, and it was before I think David was crowned, or at some point there was chaos, and so his nurse, Mephibosheth's nurse, grabbed him to take him to safety. And in the process, she dropped him, and he fell and was crippled. And so that's all it says about Mephibosheth's nurse, is that she grabbed him, she dropped him, he was crippled for life. And then, we go on later on when David is king, and he remembers Jonathan, and he asks, are there any of his, family there? And somebody said, well, there's his crippled son that's still alive. And so he brings him to his table. And for the rest of his life, Mephibosheth was taken care of by David in the castle, And so it's so cool, because so often I feel like we can relate to Mephibosheth's nurse, because, we have one job and we fall short of it, and we're like, God, you told me to do this, and I was doing my best. I mean, like my absolute best, and it wasn't good enough, because now, look at all the damage that I have done. And, we just berate ourselves. And it's so cool, because it's like God used even her falling, because like nobody paid him any attention, and that probably saved his life, and so she rescued him, and she did good. But, I like to think that she got to see him, later on, to know, but maybe she didn't. Maybe she died, but not ever knowing what happened to him.
I love that. There is a purpose in every ounce of scripture, every sentence, every paragraph. And some of those things, we might look at that and we just kind of breeze over it and don't take the time. And that's what's so amazing about your podcast, is it kind of unpacks things. It kind of brings things out into the open, to where we stop and think about, wait, why? The question behind the why. And I love that. I love that. So that was your most popular one. Well, which was your favorite one personally that you enjoyed doing the research on, or what is your favorite woman from the Bible?
Well, my new favorite that I really discovered and enjoyed was the daughters of Zelophehad, who I had never heard of.
Not a clue. I'm lost over here.
I know. Well, I ran across, it's another one of those, just a couple of verses. But what happened is, it was when the Israelites were getting ready to go into the promised land. And so they knew that they were going, and Moses was, he knew he wasn't going to into the promised land, but what they were doing is they were dividing up the property so that each of the tribes and each of the families would be allotted a certain property. And they were going through it, and there were the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, and their father had died in the wilderness, and they had no brothers. And so, as the way it was, they would not have received any property, because, it always went to the male, the firstborn son. So they went before Moses and basically presented their case of, it is not right. Our father was a godly man. He died in the wilderness. He only had daughters. And our family will not be represented in the promised land, because of us just being daughters. So we think that if there is not a son in the family, that the daughters, should receive the property. And so Moses ended up saying, bringing it to the Lord. And the Lord said, yes, they're right. So he did that. They made it a law. And it was actually challenged later on, because some of the men said, well, what if these women go and they marry other tribes or foreigners or whatever, what happens? And so there was like a clause in there that said that they had to marry within, their tribe, so that it would still stay within the tribe. And they did. All the girls got married, and they married within their tribe. But what was so fascinating with that is I discovered that I think it was a 1921 issue of one of the law journals, one of the main, journals, that there was an article on the daughters of Zelophehad and how it paved the way for women's rights and property rights. And I'm just like, that is so amazing.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
I never knew that, Sharon. That is amazing.
I know.
It's a big deal, women talking about women's rights, and so forth. But there is nothing in scripture that we cannot apply to our life in any form or fashion. And that is just so amazing that it was in a law book. Do you know if they're still teaching that in law school?
I don't know, but I did see references, like there are modern references to that 1921 article. which, so I guess they are, because I guess they are still teaching it if they're still referring to that,
Absolutely.
that old vaccine.
There's a lot of things legally, like the 7 year, like the bankruptcy law. We know that 7 years comes from the Bible. And we know that so much of the early things, the reason I think that's so amazing, because we all know, and I won't get on a tangent here, how the universities are teaching and so much secularism that comes in, everything is rooted and grounded in God's truth and in his word. And we can always find that there. And it's just amazing to me every time I learn something like that. So I'm so grateful you just shared that.
I know. That's what, when I discovered it, it's like, I just wanted to tell the world. It's like, people, do you know this is here? Especially when people talk about, like a lot of times people have this idea that women are second-class citizens in the Bible. And I'm just like, honey, have you read the same Bible that I have? Right. Because that is so not the case. I mean, God was always making provisions for women, and he was always, watching out. So many of the laws that we think are so horrific, it wasn't the law that was horrific, it was the behavior that was horrific, and God was actually watching out for the women that were victims, but we get caught up in, stuff, and it's like, no, there was bad stuff, there always is, but God was always on the side of the woman, making sure, because so often she was the victim.
Absolutely. And to me, it's stories of redemption over and over, and his protection and his hand on us, especially, and let's talk for a moment about Jesus and how important women were in his ministry. I mean, some of the most famous women from the Bible came from that time, there's Mary and Martha and, Mary Magdalene, and all these different ones. And, so many people, like you said, they have a misconception, even now with Christianity, like the women are just like, and God uses his girls.
He does. And I mean, like, I was really surprised to discover that, like, we know about the 12 disciples, but there were a group of women that were always traveling with him, and it was there serving with him and ministering with him. And that gets lost. And then, like Paul, we always, like, I used to think, I hate Paul because he was just so mean to women, like, I just am glad I don't have to meet him. And then the more I started reading him, I discovered, I think he didn't like women. There was a lot of women that he had problems with, but there was a lot of women, like Priscilla. He didn't have a problem with Priscilla, and she was teaching a man, because he was, there's was it Barabbas, I believe it was, or one of the men where he was giving false teaching. And Priscilla pulled him aside and said, no, that is not right, and then in some of his letters, you'll see, like, Phoebe was he had her delivering a letter, and there was all these different women, the daughters of Philip, who were evangelists, so there's not, the women were used in the New Testament as well as the Old Testament.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of people really get hung up on that. And whenever you look at the heart of things, and I understand that. I remember reading some of Paul's writings thinking, wait, was he, not aware how God was using all of these women throughout the ministry? But back then, a lot of people don't understand, there were some women that weren't really necessarily educated. And that's what he was referring to, as to, inquire of your husbands, because they had more knowledge, not because they were, like way up here and they're way down here, is simply trying to keep from things getting confusion.
Yeah, there's a verse called, like, where it talks about the silly women. It's like, I don't want to be a silly woman. I hope that I am not a silly woman, but sometimes we are, like we get all fired up and we don't know what we're talking about,
I love that. And I love reading it in the different translations as well. So, what is your favorite translation when it comes to discovering and researching the women?
I love the New King James Version, because to me, it retains the beauty. I love the beauty of, like the King James Version, but sometimes, it's kind of off-putting. The New King James is written very modern, and to me, it has more of a storytelling, aspect of it, while, being perfectly easy to understand. So, yes, a lot of times I always go to Bible Hub and I look at all the different versions, and I always end up with, almost always, it's the New King James Version. And I realize that my Bibles that I like the most, they're always New King James.
It's interesting. It's my first Bible. Actually, my first Bible was a Catholic Bible whenever I was growing up. But then later, whenever I first got saved, someone gave me a King James, and the these and the thous tripped me up, and I was a little confused. And I went and bought a New King James, and I absolutely love it. You know, I study a lot out of the Amplified and some of the simpler versions whenever I'm dealing with. It really depends on who I'm dealing with and who I'm teaching. But I love the simplicity of it, and it is easy to understand.
It is, and it maintains like the beauty, you know, of, because I like, to me, I want the Bible to sound poetic. You know, some of the modern, like, you know, it loses something. It's so modern, and I see a need for it. I know there is a need for, you know, in certain times, but for me, in my purposes, it's what I like the best.
I love it. And I love how the Lord is using various research of historical documents to help you support all of this, because it's all there. People say all the time, well, you know, well, is it in the Bible? Secular history backs up biblical truths. You know, I think about all of the biblical scholars and over the years and how much information we have now with the internet, you know, to access all of that. So that's amazing how, you know, I'm still just befuddled how that law article in 2000 or in 1921 impacted things, and it was derived from the Bible. So listen, y'all, if you're watching, listening this, whatever, what platform you're on, you need to take heed to that. And I highly encourage you to check out this podcast. It has become one of my favorites, and I don't have time to listen to a lot of things, but Sharon is very precise, and she gives it to you, and it's something you can take away from, and it really encourages your faith. So you need to check it out. So now podcasting is your newest thing, but I know when I met you, I was honored. Moving Forward Ministries was able to endorse your project, Summer of '67. Now, let me just make a public announcement. I endorse everything Sharon does, okay? I know her heart, and I know just what she's pouring into it. That movie was absolutely amazing. I got every emotional touch, you know, laughing one moment, crying the next, and so forth. Share a little bit specifically about that film. And I know you have several projects, but that was your most recent project, wasn't it?
It was. And it was, out of all of our movies, we did 7, but it was the most personal, because it was actually inspired by my parents' story. My dad was on the USS Forrestal when it caught fire. And so growing up, he didn't talk about it a lot, but like it was just this aspect of our family history. And I didn't think anybody else knew about the USS Forrestal. I just thought it was, you know, something that happened to Daddy, and, you know, like, you know, like this was just so obscure. But we had decided we were doing one last movie, wanted to do a period movie, decided that the 60s would be the easiest to pull off on a, you know, low budget. And so I'm like, you know, I'm just going to integrate this family story that I have. And so, you know, I remembered parts, but I started asking my mom, you know, and dad questions about it. And then just started researching like everybody I could find. Like if you were in any way alive or have any memories of, you know, 1967 or the Vietnam War, tell me about it. And I love research. I just do, you know, like, and I love stories. And so talking to all these people at church, and, you know, like people would refer, like one of the guys who he had shown one of our movies at his church. And when he found out we were, you know, that I was working on the script, he's like, my mom kept a diary when my dad was in Vietnam. And he sent me the diary so that I could read it. And that was just such a treasure, but it was so wild because her diary entries were very short. It was like, you know, March 1st, 1967. You know, Jim and I went to the grocery store 252 days before Johnny comes home, you know, and I don't remember what her name was, you know, what her husband's name was, but it was like, she was counting down the days, like every day she would, you know, they weren't doing much. It was her and the baby boy, you know, would go to church, or they would go to the grocery store, or she would iron, you know, or whatever. And then it would be only so many more days until he returns. And one of the older men at church, he shared, like, he was in college during the Vietnam War. And he said that what he remembered was that all the guys would be in the dorm and they would do like this lottery based on like your birthday month to know when you were getting drafted. And so they would all gather around the TV in the dorm and to listen to know if their number was called. And he said when you would hear, like when somebody's number was called, he's like, you would hear them go to the room and you could hear them crying because they were just so afraid of going. And he's like, it was just so heartbreaking, each, day or whatever, not knowing whether you were going to be called. And so just doing all of that research, I'm just like, I wanted to pack as much as I could to show what all they went through. And, but to show that God was there. That was the overwhelming thing, is that it was a difficult time for people, but God was there. And he saw them through that difficult time. And the best thing was traveling with that movie and meeting all the different veterans and how many of them would say, thank you for telling our story. And then we actually were contacted by a preacher in Johnson City, Tennessee, who found out about the movie. And he was on the USS Forrestal when it caught fire. Wow. And he got saved during the fire. He had grown up in a Christian home and had just abandoned God and had just gone wild. He had married a good Christian woman, but he was like, just an alcoholic, drinking, just living this wild life. And before he left, he told his wife, he's like, when I come back, we're going to get a divorce. Now, nobody in their family, they didn't know anybody that had ever gotten a divorce. But he's like, you deserve to have somebody better than me. He's like, I'm no good for you. So he went on the, Forrestal, and there was a lieutenant there that kind of took him under his wing and kept witnessing to him. And so he's like, get away from me, man. I don't want to have anything to do with God. I'm, like here I am in the war. And this guy would just not let go. And he just kept witnessing to him. And they happened to be together when the fire hit. And they were like in a hallway, and the ceiling or whatever caved in. And it fell on the lieutenant, and he ended up falling on top of this guy. And basically the lieutenant died, and he was saved because of the lieutenant, being on top of him. And so when he was finally able to get out and they got to a payphone, and he called his wife and he said, honey, he said, it's the worst day of my life, but it was the best day of my life. I'm right with God. And so he came home, and he ended up soon after that, God called him into the ministry. He had been in the ministry his entire life after that, and had been at 5 churches in the Johnson City area. And when we showed the movie at his church, there were people from all 5 churches that came to that. And they all heard his testimony, and he's like, here it is. This is my life.
Oh, that is incredible, because everyone can connect with that. Everyone, either if they don't have a parent or an uncle or, someone during that era that had to go through all that. I mean, I was just a kid, but yet I could literally, when I was watching the film, I could step back in time, and it showed a lot of things as well, because I'm the baby of 9 kids. And so I have a lot of older siblings, quite a bit older than me. And it was so relatable. So it didn't matter what generation you came from. It was such a beautiful work of art of a decade, or actually it was focused on that year, but it showed everything for someone to be able to capture the moments.
Well, what's so funny is that anybody who lived it, they're always like, oh, I love it because you captured it exactly. The younger generation, like we'll have these 20 and 30-year-olds, and they'll review it and they'll go, oh, they got it all wrong. They those costumes are wrong, and this is wrong. And I'm like, the costumes were authentic. And it's like, we didn't present Hollywood 60s. We presented small town Southern, 60s, which is not the same.
No. Between our educational system and Hollywood, they have a distorted view of the world. I'm just saying. Bless them. Bless them. I love young people, but you're absolutely right. They kind of miss it on some things like that, because, television has had a huge impact on culture and the way they see things. And so when someone actually does the research or is very familiar with it, to them it is different. But you did a great job. It's an amazing film. I encourage you all to check it out. It is summer of 67, and you can find it on, what platforms would they be able to find it on right now?
It is pretty much, I mean, it's on like Amazon Prime and Tubi TV, IMDb TV. It's not on Netflix or Hulu, but I think it's pretty much everywhere else.
Well, I think everybody has Amazon Prime anymore because we all want the free shipping.
Yeah.
So go and check out this film and make it a family event. Actually, make it an educational event for the younger people in your life, because history is getting watered down in a lot of ways, and we need to know some storylines of things that actually took place. And Sharon, y'all did a brilliant job in the research and the authenticity of the film. It was just amazing. Now, we're almost out of time, but I just want to talk about a few of your other films real quick. What was your first film?
We don't talk about it much. It was way earlier. We made it when our daughter was 5. We had, it was an accident, really. I had no interest whatsoever. My husband had gone to school to be, for filmmaking, but had never done anything with it. And he did like commercials and things like that. And we moved to a small town, and he decided he was going to do like a documentary on the history. And I was like, yeah, have at it. That sounds like a great project, Somehow or another, and we cannot remember how it happened, but somehow or another, his documentary turned into a faith-based film with me writing, directing, and starring in it. And oh my goodness, it was so bad because I didn't even watch movies. I read books and I didn't know anything about it. I had done acting, but I was a theatrical actress, which does not work for a film. And so we were in agreement that if we ever did another movie, I would not be in front of the camera. That was not my calling. And so we have a couple of copies of it on VHS, which we hopefully will burn when we die so that nobody will remember us from those.
Well, you know what? I believe that we all have to crawl before we stand and walk and run and so forth. And you guys really hit it out of the park with Summer of 67. And this new podcast is inspiring the masses. And I love that God is using it to reach people in areas, and the fruit that's going to come from that, I just know it's going to be a great testimony of his goodness. So Sharon, if I had to ask you, what is a key you would like to leave the audience with? What would that key be?
I think the key to anything is just being willing to say yes, whatever God calls us to do. Every single thing in my life that has been the most rewarding has been something that I didn't expect to do, but I knew God was calling me to do it. And, when I said yes, I was blessed so much. And, so if God is asking you to do something and you're like, but I don't think I'm good at it. I don't know how many times I told him, but God, I'm not good at that, And so, and then he's always like, well, get good at it because this is what you're going to do, So, I am so thankful for that. And so I think it's so important that we be willing, whatever it is that God asks us to do it.
Wow. Well, we know that obedience is better than a sacrifice. And when we step out, we find out, and God always meets us right there. And I'm so grateful that you said yes to the projects that he's asked you to do. And so for those of you that are watching this, please share this out with your friends, family, coworkers, anybody that needs a word of encouragement. God will take your creative gifts and use them. Sharon has done filmmaking all the way to podcasting and, leadership at her church and a wonderful Christian motivator, speaker, and storyteller. So I encourage you guys to check out our website, follow the podcast. Sharon, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. It is a beautiful day in Middle Tennessee, and I see you're outside. We're grateful for you to be here. Thank you so much. Y'all, make sure you get this out to your friends and family. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time on Keys to Your Best Life.